Okay, I'm speaking again to David Satter. This is part two of our discussion. Welcome to the Kyiv Post studio. David, I reiterate, is a famous US journalist, author, expert on Russia, Ukraine, this region broadly. Okay, where are we at? You've studied Putin's use of terror as not only to cause fear in the West, but also to impose a certain mindset in his own people. How do you read the situation?
Well, there's no way to minimize the danger, and the danger originates in that mindset of the Russian leaders and the mindset that they attempt to impose on the Russian population. If we were dealing with normal people, or with people who have some vestige of conscience and some identifiably human characteristics when it comes to concern for other people, we could say that of course they're not going to blow up a nuclear power station. That's absurd. Or we could say that they won't use tactical nuclear weapons. That would be so outrageous, so disproportionate, so criminal that these people who've been meeting with Western leaders, who've been attending international functions, who've been holding even their own discussion club, the Valde Discussion Club, where they are ostensibly open with foreign experts and journalists, well, they wouldn't do something like that. But the reality is different, that the most important barrier to doing something like that, it lies in the character of those who have the power to do it. And there's nothing in their character that would prevent it. However, they may be deterred by fear of consequences for themselves. And it's that we have to hope for.
So could we have a Caligula-like situation with the Praetorian Guard afraid for its own lives and future and wealth, actually saying enough to Putin?
You remember this from the Soviet period when you and I were reporting and writing about the Soviet Union. Many people claiming to be experts offered their profound opinions about what was going on in the Kremlin, which in fact turned out to be meaningless. And it's just as difficult now. We can judge by certain external indications of what might be going on in their minds. I think it's fair to say that there are people in both the security services and the army who don't go along with this war and understand that it's a disaster for Russia. We know that because there were dissenting views expressed before the war began.
Are you detecting any shift in attitudes, however slight, because of casualties, the ineffectiveness of the war operations, the ostracization from the West and the sanctions?
Ordinary people.
Yeah.
I am to a degree, but there's a countervailing tendency. For one thing, there's popularity of Putin appears to be declining, in part because of the ineffectiveness of what's going on. The mobilization has compelled, as we know, or inspired hundreds of thousands of people to flee the country. Those people are needed in the economy and in the army itself. But
David, how do we explain the phenomena of Prigozhin and Girkin being allowed to come out with their statements in a despotic state, attacking the leadership and the policies that are being enacted? What is this telling us?
I think it's important to bear in mind that those statements are not necessarily to Putin's disadvantage. Mm-hmm. As strange as it may seem, their blood-curdling remarks actually create the impression that Putin is more moderate and that he's someone that the West can work with. So it's not necessarily to the advantage of Putin to shut them down completely. And they also, by the way, provide kind of a release of tension for those sentiments. Those, if those sentiments could not be expressed, they would present a serious danger, because they're definitely building up in the armed forces and in other places.
Let's look now quickly, if we can, at Ukraine and its stance, and then perhaps the takeaway from what has galvanized the West, reunited the West. Is this a significant unforeseen consequence of this war? But how do you assess the way that Ukraine and President Zelensky have responded to this grave challenge and presented their message and their appeals to the outside world?
Well, I think they've done a good job. I think President Zelensky has demonstrated real ability to reach out to the world, reach out to his own people. I think find it difficult to criticize his war leadership. The one area in which I think Ukraine is deficient is in reaching out to the Russian people themselves. This is a very difficult thing to do, but it is possible, and one of the ways it can be done, I'm quite convinced, is to remind people of the regime's crimes against their own people, reiterate that they have no concern for the lives of their own people, and Exhibit A is, of course, the apartment bombings. This is the most important. What is the most important episode in the history of the post-Soviet space since the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, Christmas Day 1991?
Remind us, what year was that?
99. Saved the criminal regime and created the conditions for Putin to become dictator for life. So the Ukrainians, if I were advising them, I guess I'm advising them through the Kyiv Post, is to point out the illegitimacy of this regime and how it came to power and how it used terror against its own people. My book on this subject, or one of them, and in any case, is in Ukrainian, and I hope it can be of some use in this respect. But beyond that, Ukraine is doing what it can. No one is perfect in terms of combating Russian disinformation, but they're doing pretty well. I think they could possibly do a bit better, but
because it's been a challenge on several fronts. I mean, the mortal enemy and danger from Russia, but the need to consolidate and build a modern political nation, cohesive, given all the problems that existed and the divide and conquer tactics that were used both by internal politicians and external ones. And I think, retaining the confidence of the West as it pumps in huge amounts of financial and military support now, and being given the credit for attempts to curb corruption and bring greater transparency and rule of law to the picture.
It's very important for people in Ukraine to understand the traditional patterns of corruption, which grew up in the Soviet times, actually, and emerged into the light of day after the fall of the Soviet Union, can be used to discredit the war effort in countries which are supporting Ukraine now. And that's a big risk. So I think, as a matter of simple patriotism, people should understand how important it is to resist the temptations of corruption.
And conditionality will be very important. Conditionality in terms of the West's input into the rebuilding and reshaping of Ukrainian society and its infrastructure. And hopefully the Ukrainian mindset will be more receptive to that conditionality.
I hope so, and I believe it will be, because people cannot be indifferent to the terrible price that's being paid. And I don't think that the Ukrainian population will not want to see the fruits of victories. stolen or sullied by the behavior of a group of operators who don't have the country's interests at heart.
Right.
That's my hope for the future, and even a guardedly optimistic prognosis.
David, last but certainly not least, the West. The impact of this terrible war on the West's sense of unity, the reaffirmation of core values, review of the vision of the future. What's your take on that?
You know, there's an Israeli historian, Yuval Harari, who wrote a book called *Sapiens*, which was an international bestseller, in which he said the era of peace has come and war is something we can't even imagine anymore. Well, I hope that these events have demonstrated to people in the West that was an over-optimistic prediction.
The end of history?
That was Francis Fukuyama's notion that grand ideologies no longer will dictate world events. But the problem is that people can come up with an ideology. It doesn't have to be plausible, and it's always a temptation, because it's people are looking for something that gives them the answer to every question, and relieves them of the obligation to think. But what I believe we face now is a situation in which, after the victory of Ukraine, which we all hope is going to be achieved in the foreseeable and the near future, the impetus toward Western development in Ukraine, in cooperation with Western European and American institutions, will be so great that there will be very fertile soil here for the development of reliable and long-lasting and just legal and political institutions.
We keep our fingers crossed. Thank you for your wisdom and insights. I've been speaking to David Satter, a renowned US journalist, author, specialist on this part of the world. Thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure to have you here at the Kyiv Post. Thank you.
Thank you, Bohdan.